Okay, our first question, I'm going to skip the very first one and come back to it, but a lot of people in California choose charter schools because they feel it's a way to step away from the public school environment but still have some control, still get some quality education. Can charter schools opt out of teaching all of this sex ed we've been hearing about today and before? Who would like to grab that?
I'll grab it. I'm Debbie Downer today. So, AB 2601, which was Sheila Weber's bill, mandated that charter schools are now governed by the California Healthy Youth Act. And increasingly, charter schools are being brought under every single education code that's out there that we escape to get away from. When I first started, our daughter's going to turn 30. She was 5, and I homeschooled through a charter school my first year or two. Things have drastically changed, and you are not exempt. As a matter of fact, they've specifically named charter schools as needing to be compliant with the California Healthy Youth Act.
All right.
May I add real quick? Just remember, charter schools are public schools, and he who pays the piper calls the tune.
Good to know. Thank you, guys. All right, this one is directed at Pastor Jack. When is the proper age to begin talking to your children about sex, and how, and what do you say, and when, and where?
Yeah, your child, first of all, you know your child better than anybody on the planet, so thank you for your question. There's going to be a time when your child starts asking or saying things that at an age that you as the parent, and I really believe that this is something that is uniquely special to you and your child. Some friend might say, oh, for us it was 9 years old. Don't do that as a rule. Your child will begin to question and ask, what's this, what's that, what about that? And that's when if you have a husband and a wife in that home, this is where you need to be united on the talk and this awesome curriculum, conversational pieces that you can go to. Boy, back in the old days, we had nothing but family life. Many ministries have the way of breaching that question. But by all means, each and every one of us as parents must know how to talk to our child. Some children, they're going to want to have it, you got to tell them straight up this way. And they're like, okay, far out. Other kids, they're more like a flower, and you got to be a little careful with them. But don't give them too much too soon. Let them come back to you. But this is going to require you keeping your eyes on that child and your ears open to that child. Again, parenting. So there's a way to do that. And I'll end with this. It needs to be communicated, I would say, that in God's goodness, He created Adam and Eve, and it was very good, what God has for you. And communicate clearly. I'm a big fan. You don't know what's happening here on Wednesday nights, but Wednesday nights have proven that people who are promiscuous, they tell us, I wish I would have stayed celibate, or not celibate, but I would have practiced abstinence until marriage. We have the world telling us that now because of their pain. So you want to introduce your child, and you want to introduce your child, not someone else.
Wow. Isn't there also something about maybe modeling good communication in this area, because that sort of forms what they're going to do with their children when they grow up? Because I would never do to my kids what my parents did to me. And I don't have a good model as a result of that.
I didn't have a model either. And yes, to what Don just said, there needs to be a way. I hope you can handle this. But we don't have any rites of passage in our culture, like many European countries or South American countries do. It can actually be done in such a way that it's almost a rite of passage for your child. And there doesn't have to be one rite of passage. There can be numerous rites of passages for your child. In other words, it's a hallmark moment to where you say and you make it clear. You might even have a special night or a special day with your kid, that it's a pizza thing, whatever, and you talk. It's something that you communicated to them that's special, and it's wonderful, and it's of God, and God's genius. in what he's created. He's so amazing. And God made it so that we would have family and babies and you know, and they get it. It's like, yeah. You don't want them to walk away saying, oh, right, dirty? Uh-huh, oh boy. Don't do that.
Right on.
I wanted to follow up a little bit
Sure,
on
Monica.
that. I was presenting to some parents in Oklahoma who were asking the same questions. And I asked them some questions. I said, what is it about talking to your kids about sex that's difficult for you? And I wanted to hear from them. I wanted them to say it out loud. They said, well, because it's so awkward and it's so graphic and it's so uncomfortable. And I said, well, who told you to be graphic? Where did you learn that? And they didn't know what to say. You know, those adults, those parents looked at me like they were little kids all of a sudden. And I said, what does God say in Genesis? This is as far as he went. Adam knew Eve. Even God wasn't graphic with us. It's not necessary to be graphic with your children. So I raised, like I said in my talk earlier, I raised my son very differently. I definitely did not use comprehensive sex education to teach him. But I did do one thing that I think was really helpful. I'm really good at counseling skills and watching and observing and taking my time with him and others. And I said, okay, he'd ask me a question and I'd say, okay, I'm gonna answer your question. And not fully, I'm gonna answer it just as much as I think you need to know right now at this age. But as soon as it starts to feel uncomfortable and you don't like it, I want you to hold up your hand and I want you to say, that's enough. And I'm not gonna question you, and we're just gonna move on and do something else. And he used it several times as he was growing up. He'd ask me a question, I'd start to answer it, and then he'd say, that's enough. I wouldn't question it, and we'd move on. And about a year later, he'd ask me again, and we would go a little further. So I agree with Pastor Jack here that you have to really observe and know your child, and you are the person that knows your child the best.
Awesome. So this next question is directed at Matt, but some of you others would probably want to weigh in on this too. What is the next step to take if the school principal refuses to sign and acknowledge the opt-out form? Let's just talk about the opt-out form because there's several different aspects to dealing with it at that level. So start there, and there's a couple of other facets I think we can approach that question on as well.
So if you see the opt-out form that was out in the lobby, we worked on Karen with it. It's a very detailed form, right? It says this is the California law, the health instruction opt-out. We've reviewed the curriculum as parents, and so you need to review the curriculum. Don't sign this if you're like, oh, I'm just going to pick up that form and throw it off at the office. Take a moment, review the curriculum. And then the form says, we've reviewed the curriculum and we find that what you are teaching conflicts with our religious or moral beliefs as it relates to these subjects. So we are requesting that you dismiss our child whenever any health education is discussed, including discussions of gender identity and sex education and things like that. So what you are doing as a parent is saying, I'm informed, I'm knowledgeable, and I've decided that what you are teaching my child is inconsistent with my beliefs. Let them be excused. So if you've done all of that and you submit that to the principal and the principal says, not going to do it, you now have a basis to take action. As I said, let's sue. That's what I'm here to do. No, I'm kidding you. Not really, actually. Yeah, I'm really not kidding this time. Because these are your statutory rights. The legislature said, we're going to give you an opt-out. And if the principal is ignoring that, if the school is ignoring your right as a parent that you have been given by the state of California, then you now have that open door, that opportunity to go to a judge and say, Judge, here's a situation where that wall we were talking about, remember the slide? They've opened a gap in the wall and said, my rights are now in the school, and they're now trying to put bricks up where they don't belong. Give me justice. So that's exactly what we want to be doing. So you want to make sure that you've looked at the curriculum, that you can honestly sign that form, and when you've done so, and the principal says no, give us a call at ADF. That's what we're here to do. That's what we want to do, that when we have these opportunities to defend our legal rights in court, that we move so and do it with boldness and conviction.
Great. And also, Karen, you had asked me to mention that you guys were out of the opt-out forms out there, but they're being reprinted and they're going to be available at the end. So if any of you didn't get that form, there will be a supply of them after.
Yes, they've quickly started to photocopy, so there should be more out there at both Real Impact Table and then Capital Resource Institute. But I wanted to, this has been going on, and we've been in the battle of sex ed, and I think Gina and I, for the last couple of years, have been really immersed in fighting this. And this education code was new to me because I was relying on the California Healthy Youth Act and what it says about opt-out. So when I found this a good 4 or 5 weeks ago, I got a hold of ADF, but the other thing I did was I went and I got the legislative intent and all the documents behind it, and it's really interesting because in asking ADF their thoughts on this, they actually talk about when they were debating this bill, which by the way was passed as an emergency measure, so it took 2/3, and it was in a Democrat-controlled legislature, so Republicans and Democrats voted for this. It was talked about how this provision had been taken out of the sex education, and now we're going to put it back, and we're going to put it back into health, so it's more of a broad opt-out. That was news to me. It was even better than the current opt-out, and that's something I'm excited about, and we were excited to kind of unveil it today. But it's exciting. The law is very clear on this issue, and the legislators were very clear in putting it into the broad umbrella of all health education, not just sex education.
So as I understand it, there's a period of time in the school year, I think during the spring, when the real intensive sexual education curriculum is taught. But throughout the year and throughout a variety of different subjects, there are also gender-related topics that come up. Does this opt-out form only deal with the portion that's the most egregious, which is going to happen, I understand, in the spring? What about some of these other areas? Does this mean that opt-out form applies to those as well?
I'm going to take it and then Matt, follow up, because I just play an attorney at work and he's a real attorney. I would so love to sue. If I ever can, please let me know. So there's a lot out there on SB 48 and the social science frameworks. That's totally different. Matt can address that. And I don't want to say there's nothing you can do, but there are limits on that. It's another one of those where you are being misinformed because you don't have to teach history in the 2nd grade, so you don't all of a sudden need a new 2nd grade history book. But school districts are buying into it after the frameworks. So this is specific to sexual health education and health education. So as the frameworks are coming out, and school boards are being pressured to adopt health textbooks that start in kindergarten and are going to be done throughout the year. This piece of education code would apply to that too. Now you mentioned books, and I've had a couple of parents ask me about books that kids come home and read and object to. And actually I'd like for Matt to address that, but we've been successful in pressuring school districts to give them another option. Often in these graphic books, it violates their own language code. Like you're not allowed to say this word and that word on school grounds, but the pornographic books that they're reading. And so a lot of times a letter to the school district and just a little bit of pressure is enough to let you pick a different book for your child to read, because this writing really is well done, and it does really implant in the mind. And I remember our one son up in Granite Bay getting a note that said, these are the books, and these are why you might object. Violent rape scene. I mean, all of this stuff. I was like, who signs yes, that's okay for my high schooler to read? So again, it comes back to you asserting your rights and telling them, no, they're not going to read that. We need to find an alternative. But now Matt can do the real answer.
No, I line up with Karen on all of this, and I've actually got, so this is the Health Education Content Standards for California Public Schools, kindergarten through grade 12. If I wanted to know what all is encompassed in that health opt-out, I think the Health Education Standards would be a good source of that. Just as a quick point, it includes discussions such as, there we go. I recognize that there are individual differences in growth and development, physical appearance, gender roles, and sexual orientation. And then goes on to other stuff about sexual contact, emotional, psychological consequences, and all of these other things that we're talking about. So if the state health standards encompass all of these discussions of sexual orientation, gender identity, and all of these things, that to me is a clear indication that your right to opt out of health instruction includes all of these subjects. Now, quickly to Karen's point about when it comes to specific books and things like that, it's a case-by-case basis, and what I would recommend is if you're confronted with your child being told that they have to read a book that has very graphic content in it, and that you're looking at and saying, this is beyond, some minor stuff, but I mean, this is hardcore stuff that we object to, give us a call. Because there may be circumstances where, although there's limits of how parents can influence and make decisions about the curriculum, when it goes so far that it is really violating some free exercise rights of your ability to instruct and raise up your children, that may be the type of test case that we want to bring. So when you come across those issues, please give us a call, talk through us. We can look through it and analyze it and see if that might be the type of vehicle, the type of case where we can help further parental rights.
Awesome. All right, so if the public schools aren't an option, how about homeschooling? Here's a question for Brian. What if you're not smart enough to homeschool?
If you're a parent, then you're qualified. I think Pastor Jack talked about accidents, or somebody talked about accidents. God didn't make an accident. He did not make an accident. And so you might say, yeah, but I've not been trained. Remember, you're homeschooling your child from birth, all of you. And then some of you, maybe explicitly, without thinking about it, you opted out of homeschooling and you decided to put them under the teaching, training, and indoctrination of other people. So let me say, and I'll be practical because I get awfully philosophical. If you don't think you know how to teach your child to read, first of all, maybe you don't know how to read, so you should go learn how to read. Second of all, I remember back in the 80s, Betsy and I bought something like a $19 curriculum that you could use to teach your children how to read phonetically and read well. And then you read to your children, and all of these kinds of things that are very simple. If you talk to a veteran homeschool mom or dad, they can talk about it with you. But you are not disqualified. Just like you don't get to be, your child gets to be 5 years old, and all of a sudden the government says, you're too dumb, Mom, you can't teach your kids. You've already been teaching for 5 years. That's a lie from the culture. That's a lie from hell. That's a lie from the certification system and all those kinds of things. All of you are qualified to continue educating your children. And we know from research. Remember, I like to put research last because it's not the answer. We have a 35-year-old experiment now that shows moms and dads who are high school dropouts can teach your children effectively and become excellent in academics and love learning. And it's not about test scores. It's about learning. It's about hearing about Christ and following him if the Lord sees fit to save your children.
You guys, I want to also follow up on that, which is excellent. Keep this in mind, please. My wife started homeschooling our kids in the early 80s when it was like from Mars. But even still, there was some great resources, and there were co-ops, and there were groups. And there were even some gatherings where there were team tutorials that were going on. Nowadays, to homeschool nowadays, it sounds like you're like locked in a cave with papyrus and ink or a chisel. No way. A couple of wonderful things happen. There's a massive network of help. There's great co-ops that are available to you, so you're not alone. And then the other thing is this. The parent who says, I don't think I'm smart enough. I can tell you from hundreds and hundreds of families who said the exact same thing. Listen now, because you know this is you. I'm terrified, but the need to reach my child is stronger than me being terrified. The parent begins to learn with the child alongside, and the parent gets enthusiastic and excited, and the kid's now getting pumped up because mom and dad's totally blown away, and it is awesome. And by the way, pick your strengths. In your home, maybe dad's really good about economics or about culture, and mom's awesome about history, and mom's great about astronomy. Tag team it. That's what we did at our home. Science is my background. I would come home in the evenings. Listen, please, and I'm done. You don't need to spend 8 hours in a classroom looking at a film or a chalkboard. You'd be shocked to get a little project on a 5x7 card. When I would get home from work after a long day, I'd march the kids right out into the backyard, and we would conduct an amazing experiment, and in 1 hour or less, my kids would be so pumped about what they were learning that they couldn't wait to do it again. If you are terrified, you're probably going to make the best teacher because you're motivated.
Excellent.
And if you would add to that, when we were talking in the foyer during our interview, I asked you about the special journey that parents will go on with their kids as they homeschool together. Just comment about that, because that's something I remember going home from school, public school, and my parents would say, "How was school?" And I go, "It was okay." And that was the extent of our conversation about that. And then I'd go upstairs and try to do my homework. But that journey and that relationship.
When you decide to continue homeschooling because you didn't put them in institutional school, or you get them out of institutional school, this could scare you. It's a change of life. It's a different way of living. And you actually, people say, well, how do these homeschool kids learn all these things? They just talk. They talk with adults. They talk with other kids in the neighborhood. They talk, they read. They get to read. Did you hear that? They read. In school, reading becomes a pain in the neck. It's like punishment. You have to read a book. In our family, and Betsy and I are nothing amazing. We just enjoyed learning with them. They started reading books. I went into my son's room one day. His one son and 7 daughters, so he had his own room. And there were books and books and books, hundreds of books in his room. And I asked him when he was about 17, did you read any of these books? I read all of them. I said, you read all of them? Well, except for a few. He'd read hundreds of books that were not assigned. And he did not, I won't say his name, he did not read fluently until he was about 9 or 10 years old. And you learn together. I would love to do a research project. I will always want to do this on homeschool moms and dads. Take any random 100 homeschool moms, random 100 public school moms, and do tests on them, what they know, their enthusiasm for learning, their Renaissance woman mind. You'd be blown away by what they learn along with each other and how they just do things together. It's
Awesome.
Incredible. It's a double generation education. And try it. Give it a try. Say, just for 1 year, tell your parents, because they're going to think you're weird. And then, of course, it goes for 12 years.
So we're going to ping pong back here to the curriculum. At what grades do they start to teach the new health education curriculum, which is kind of what we've been talking about? And when did they start teaching the new curriculum? So I guess that would kind of be between Matt and Karen.
Okay, and maybe Gina. They are teaching it, it's mandated once in middle school and once in high school, but each district is doing it differently. San Diego Unified has a very progressive Advocates for Youth curriculum, and I think they're doing it kindergarten through 12th grade, and they're doing it every grade, as opposed to just once in 7th and once in high school, which is what the law mandates. And the left is increasingly trying to get school districts to go lower and lower and lower. In addition to that, the health frameworks cover what we would consider sex education, and those are K through 12. Thank you. You approved?
Listen, I have to ask a question because I wasn't here early, but my question serves a purpose. Did any of you see, did you see this, did you show it on the screens today of some of these drawings? And how come? Why, listen, why not? They can see them in the foyer? Do you have one book or 100 books? Because isn't it amazing? It should have been on the screen.
Gina said some of the bad words.
The kids are looking at them. But you might say, oh, it's too graphic. Excuse me. The kids are looking at them. And so I had the opportunity of not knowing what happened earlier. That adds to the exclamation point of this conference. You understand that? If it's not on the screen because it's too ugly, it's too perverted, that should tell you everything.
That's right. All right, Monica, how are organizations like Planned Parenthood working behind the scenes to influence public education?
I think what you have to really understand about Planned Parenthood and some of these other organizations, I know I mentioned a website called Future of Sex Education, and you'll see that there's several organizations that collaborated to create what's on that website. So this whole plan of lifelong conversations with your children about comprehensive sex education and being promiscuous. So even though Planned Parenthood's logo is not on there, they're a part of that. Cardia was a part of that. There's several national training centers that are a part of that. They collaborate, they work together. So if you see Positive Prevention Plus, know that they're buddies with Planned Parenthood. So they all collaborate with one another. I think part of their strategy that's been really effective, obviously, is that they start from the top. They're not waiting for permission. They go straight to the leaders. They go straight into getting positions in health departments. They go straight into getting positions in the CDC. They go straight into having positions at the Office of Population Affairs. And that's how they do it. These national sex education standards, all of those were created by those organizations, left-leaning organizations, not organizations that hold Christian values or your values or family values. It's their values. And they named them national standards. So I don't know if that answers the question. And how do they get into schools? Well, for example, in California, I mean, Planned Parenthood, for example, funds, I think, majority of the teacher unions. So, I mean, they're with the leaders. They've indoctrinated the leaders. I mean, they've got their hands in every area possible. In Texas, we have SHACs. School health advisory councils are supposed to be made up of parents and community members, but parents and community members don't really know about it. But guess who did? Planned Parenthood. And so they planted their people in the SHACs to then make health determinations about health curriculum in the schools. As soon as we started to figure out that SHACs existed, we started getting parents in there and getting involved. So we're a little late in the game. But this has been a strategy that they've had since the 40s. And it's not just Planned Parenthood, it's many different organizations. And that's a whole other presentation about the long history of it. And I think the beginning of when government funding started to really push risk reduction education was with HIV. And that's the first time that we saw government money funding a prevention program.
And if you would, take 30 seconds just to let everybody know that we're late to the game in the U.S. Planned Parenthood has been doing this for decades in other countries, and it's really advanced. You told me some horror stories about what goes on in Africa.
Right. So again, I mean, they have a great business model. So they're international, and they have a great influence over the UN. And so the UN pushes comprehensive sex education in foreign countries, especially foreign countries that are impoverished. I have, many women in my life, pro-life women, who go to the UN and align with, for example, some women in Africa who come to the UN and fight tooth and nail, saying, stop bringing comprehensive sex education to Africa. Ever since you brought this education, sexual violence against children and women have increased. Stop bringing this, and the UN won't stop doing it. So it's everywhere, unfortunately. But I'm not without hope. Look what's happening here today.
Amen.
Yeah. We serve a great God.
Gina, where can folks look up further information on all the subjects after today? Is there a list of websites and resources?
Well, you can start with Karen's organization, Capital Resource Institute, capitalresource.org, and she has information for you. And we also have information on realimpact.us, and we've just populated a brand new page with a lot of information specifically about comprehensive sex ed. And we have some of the curriculum links where you can get Advocates for Youth Rights, Respect, Responsibility for free, and links to other curricula that you have to actually pay for. But we're going to be reviewing curriculum. We're going to be reviewing some of the books that were listed on the health frameworks frameworks, and we're going to be adding a lot of information that you should have to educate yourself, and it's growing on a regular basis, so really, please, we need you to stay connected with us that way.
We're up against the clock. We have one last question, and I wanted to direct this to Karen, anybody else that wants to chime in on this. There have been a lot of different ways parents have sought to push back. One of those is sit-outs. What about sit-outs? Do they keep money from public schools? Is this a strategy, a tactic that's worth parents getting involved in? Give us a little bit on the sit-out side of things.
Okay, there's a lot of information out there, and Gina and I actually debate, not necessarily debate, but talk about this issue a lot, because our organization has participated in the national sit-out and at different times. So I'll say a couple of things. In California, 3 unexcused absences, unless you're going for confidential medical services, and truancy kicks in. And though there's information out there that say they aren't going to come after you for months until your kid's truant for months, they can come after you as soon as you have a 3rd unexcused absence. So you have to be very careful in participating in a sit-out. The second thing I would say is that sitting out at your local school district, your local school board doesn't have a choice. They have to implement the law. So you need to go to the right policymakers if you want to influence them, but your local school district, it's not their fault they're following the law, and it's not the fault of the school board that they're following the law. And thirdly, there's a lot that goes into ADA. And I've done a lot with the Rockland parents, and they had a sit out, and I think a lot of you probably saw it. Over 1,000 people sat out. Now, for a small district, that's a fairly decent number, but we have over 6 million students in California, and I just don't believe the schools felt it at all or even knew. And then secondly, both of the sit-outs last year, even though we were sending letters in saying, hey, we're going to cost you school district, ha, 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 my kid's sitting home, ADA was done being counted. There are only, you take attendance all the time, but ADA calculation is only done 2 different periods, it's complicated, but throughout the year. So you didn't cost the school district anything with the 2 sit-outs. They actually got a smaller classroom, but not $1 was removed from the classroom because ADA was done being calculated for the state of California at that time. So just be careful, before you jump on, something someone's doing. I get the passion and wanting to do something, but let's be strategic about this and planned and disciplined and get to the point where we can have Matt sue.
I've watched a lot of political activities over the last 35 years. The most effective sit-out is to never sit your child in.
All right. As the MC, I have the prerogative to ask the last question. And we talk about sit-outs and we've talked about opt-outs. What about if a church were to, or a faith-based organization were to teach the youth how to stand up for their faith-based values in public school? And when this garbage begins to get taught, rather than opting out, what if these kids are taught how to stand up and say, you know what, you shouldn't be teaching us this, it's wrong, it says this in the Bible, it says that in the Bible. What about if we train a brigade to go to each school and sit in and stand up for faith-based values? There's Summit that's out there that teaches this stuff. What about that as a strategy? And if they get shut down, well, that smells like it might be a lawsuit.
Yes, it does. Now you're talking my language. No, I 100% agree. One of the most effective things we've seen, not just on this issue, but you think about life, you think about pro-life issues and so many others, is seeing students engage in school, forming clubs, talking about this in response to assignments. I didn't bring this up, but students have a constitutional right. If there's a health class and they have to write, some essay about some of these subjects with sex ed, they start incorporating Bible, incorporating these principles of abstinence and things like that. They have a right to do that. And if a school or a teacher gives them a bad grade for that, yeah, I'm there. That's right. So I completely agree with this. We need warriors, not just outside of the school trying to change, but sending them into the schools, to change it from the inside out.
Awesome.
And I want to say
Yes.
something. I think at our church, it's the culture to train up the kids with a biblical worldview, and that's coming from Pastor Jack, our high school, junior high pastors. And we have seen the younger generation that has gone on to college, they're off becoming lawyers and caring about the family rights and leading the pro-life organizations and just getting very involved. And our kids have grown up to be very, very active in the culture. And that's just the culture of our church. Right, Pastor Jack? What would you say about that?
It is. Don's talking about apologetics. We want our kids
Right.
at this church, and thank God they have, where they're indoctrinated into the Word of God, into truth. And so our kids know how to defend their faith. They're asked, why do you believe? What is it you believe, and why do you believe that? And so they're trained, and this is just, as Gina said, it's the nature of our church. Why? Because we want them to go out and to radically affect the world for Christ. We don't want them to tiptoe around the world. We want them to go out with confidence in the Lord, knowing that the Word of God is true. And so a child, listen, they can learn so much faster than we. They get it better than us. They understand truth is much more clear to them. They're great receptors. And I tell you, our junior high and high school apologetics is awesome. And it's just wonderful to watch the kids stand up in class and say, hey, listen, that's actually not correct. Or, to debate that in a respectable way, not in an ugly way, but teach your kid to think critical thinking, and they'll flourish. Your kids have got to have the answers, or else they'll get lost. But you have the answers.